their focus has been lost on inflation. But ultimately, they have to report to the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee of Parliament on their implementation of monetary policy. Are they achieving their target of 1 to 3% inflation on average? And I'd say at some point they're going to have to say, well, no, we don't think we're achieving it, quite frankly, with inflation at 4.9%. And that's what I mean. At some point, they're going to pay catch up with the interest rates. And this is where it gets interesting, and we can start to draw out some of the implications for housing.
Welcome back to our third remote data instalment of Tea with Tony. At the time of filming, which is mid to late October, Auckland and Waikato remain in a level 3 environment. Inflation has just hit a 10-year high of 4.9%. Interest rates are on the move and house prices haven't yet taken a reality check. In fact, it's seemingly the opposite. Let's get Tony's perspective on all of that. Hi, Tony, how are you?
Good, thanks, Lenska. Good.
Okay, so did a decent portion of Kiwis just take a pay cut?
Well, basically, yeah. I mean, the cost of living has gone up by 4.9% over the past year. That's what inflation tells us, basically, the cost of living change. And this is interesting because I do a number of surveys, and one of them I've had some businesses saying, and we've given our staff a 7% pay increase. And you hear that after many years of, not much pay increase, and you think, oh, that's a lot. Well, actually, on average, pay rates in New Zealand go up each year 2% above the rate of inflation. Well, hang on, inflation's 4.9, add 2% to that, 6.9%. Basically, unless you've got yourself a 6.9 or 7% pay increase in the past year, your improvement is below average. And if you haven't even got 4.9%, you have got poorer, unless your house price has gone through the roof, in which case there's a bit of an offset. But yep, cost of living has increased substantially in New Zealand.
So let's break that apart a little bit. What are the key drivers?
Well, basically, we've got the supply chain disruption around the world, containers not where they should be, factories, demand is huge in China, but they're not always operating. So raw materials prices have gone up, especially for the construction sector, manufacturing in general in New Zealand. Housing costs have gone up. So the rents, for instance, local authority rates, food prices, petrol prices, these sort of things. Often we economists can look at it and say, oh, it's that one thing. Or maybe it's these two things. This time we look at it, and even if you strip out the top 10% of things rising strongly in price and falling in price, you've still got a very high rate of inflation out there. So it's largely across the board. And this is a big problem. Obviously, we're going to talk about the implications for interest rates, which are fairly severe, I would suggest. But it's priced all up. And there is much more to come over the next couple of years.
We've been talking about this stuff since January. Like you and I, in these sessions in Tea with Tony, we used words like inflation's a dirty word, should we be uncomfortable? And it seems very obvious that this was going to happen, and yet the Reserve Bank have not really predicted that. And obviously it's a very unusual COVID environment, but what's your take on this? Should the Reserve Bank have acted sooner?
The Reserve Bank should have started increasing interest rates early this year. It's something I've been saying for a few months, because we've had the evidence in our face from late last year that their stimulatory measures from March, April last year were having a big impact. The economy was growing strongly, and we didn't need to have the official cash rate at 0.25%. We didn't need to have the 1-year fixed mortgage rate down at about 2.19%. So they should definitely have started raising interest rates a lot earlier. But what we've seen is that just 5 months ago, only 5 months back, they predicted that right at the moment, New Zealand's inflation rate wouldn't be 4.9%, 2.5% is what they said. It's almost double what they expected. Now, I've never seen an error of that magnitude from our central bank before. And what I find, I guess, especially interesting is I came back to New Zealand in about July or June 1987, and we saw in the middle of July the quarterly inflation increase was 3.3%. Well, we've now had the biggest increase since then at the 2.2%. So this is pretty unprecedented, the rate of inflation in New Zealand. The Reserve Bank have overstimulated the economy. They have over-promoted house prices up about 39% from the low of May last year, and now there's going to be a whole new impact coming for the next couple of years of interest rates going higher, than people have been thinking over the past few months.
How seriously should everyday New Zealanders be taking this, and what do you think it's going to more before it gets better, or do you see it increasing, dropping? What's your crystal ball gazing view on this?
Yes, yeah, none of us have a perfect crystal ball, so I try and identify where the risks lie. And of course, my analysis from some time back identified the risk from the biggest monetary stimulus we've ever seen in New Zealand is that inflation surprises on the upside and eventually will receive some interest rate surprises. Now, the current inflation rate is 4.9%. When we get the next number in 3 months' time, it's going to go above 5%. And although inflation will be easing down over 2022, it's not going to fall as rapidly as the Reserve Bank, I think, are still assuming at the moment. And the key element to look here is that you can have a surge in inflation. These things happen every now and then. The question is, will it feed through into wage rates going up? Well, most definitely that's going to happen this time around. The unemployment rate is at 4%. Companies cannot find the staff that they want. If you are an employee, a candidate for a new job, you should be demanding an increase of maybe 10, 15% or so, and you've got the best chance of getting that than you will have seen in your lifetime. Employees around the planet are in their strongest bargaining position for about 4 to 5 decades. So that's interesting. Yeah, talk to your boss. Basically, everybody out there. Sorry to the employers out there, but that's where it's interesting. You get a spike in inflation, and then it will feed through to wages. And so then the question is, will higher wages lead businesses to put up their selling prices? In normal circumstances, my answer would be maybe not that much, because you and I can go online, we'll find a cheap alternative product coming out of Kazakhstan being delivered in 6 weeks, and so businesses won't increase their selling prices much. Not now. If they increase the price on me, I go online, I find the alternative product in Kazakhstan, they can't physically get it into the country for 6 or 9 months because of the supply chain disruption around the world, which is still getting worse. So that impact will come along as well. This is what will play out over 2022 into 2023. But for the moment, I don't think the Reserve Bank sees it. And that's why for the next few months, the increases in interest rates will still be not all that frightening. But then at some point, I think maybe 2022 into 23, they're going to put the hammer down and interest rates will go a lot higher than people are thinking.
What's your guidance to people on, limited incomes, energy crisis? There's an energy crisis globally. There's all sorts of things going on. And we don't want to be negative, but we want to be aware. So what's your kind of guidance around that?
Yeah, my guidance would be ask your boss for more money, even though they are going to be strained in terms of their profitability for a whole range of reasons, COVID lockdowns, etc., their costs going up, the timelines of getting materials, shipping costs, insurance costs, energy costs, all of these things are going up. And you should also expect that at some stage the economy is going to slow down quite a bit, because that's what the Reserve Bank will eventually have to do. Now, the key problem for the Reserve Bank is that they've got a great range of goals now. It used to just be keep inflation low. Then it became generate full employment, and it's become help the government with its housing policy. Their focus has been lost on inflation. But ultimately, they have to report to the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee of Parliament on their implementation of monetary policy. Are they achieving their target of 1 to 3% inflation on average? And I'd say at some point they're going to have to say, well, no, we don't think we're achieving it, quite frankly, with inflation at 4.9%. And that's what I mean. At some point, they're going to pay catch up with the interest rates. And this is where it gets interesting, and we can start to draw out some of the implications for housing, in that once the interest rates start going up, and I fully expect the likes of the 1-year fixed mortgage rate that I've said previously was had a low point of 2.19%. I think that's going to 5 to 5.5% in maybe 18 months' time. You put that in there, but you also put this sharp increase in the cost of living. Kiwis haven't been able to travel overseas for a while. This makes me even more confident in my view that from next year, when the borders open up, a lot of us are going to shift to Australia. We're going to take our businesses across there, some of us. We're going to take our skills, because the demand for what we've got is extreme in Australia. And so the net migration flow, I still think, could turn negative in 2022. And that will be one of the other factors on top of increasing supply, tax changes, higher interest rates that's going to cause the housing market to flatten out. I'm thinking the middle of 2022. Before then, it's still going to be all go. But the middle of next year, it's going to flatten. Don't think prices fall on average, but definitely a flattening is coming up. And you put all these things together and they don't say to me there's a crunch when house prices fall 9% as they did in 2008 before the GFC came along. But it says to me that the gains we've seen of almost 39% since May last year, 170% plus since about 10 years ago, or sort of 750% or so from about 30 years ago, we're in the end game. We've got a few months left of all that, and then we'll enter a new reality where house price inflation is thankfully finally going to be much slower in New Zealand. And my guess is the middle of next year. Maybe it's the June quarter. We'll see.
And look, even as a business, NZHL is really interesting. We're still high volume at the moment, still very busy. First kind of period of lockdown until kind of the rest of the country came out, there was, a slowing, and now we're back to regular flows. And it's nice to hear, I think it's very assuring to hear you say that it's, you'll see that slowing, that continued slowing of growth as opposed to an escalation or, dare I say it, a recession or crash, or the words the media love to use, the bubble bursting. So that was one of my questions. Would we see a GFC type situation potentially? I mean, that would be driven internationally, wouldn't it, if that was the case?
With the GFC 2008-09, New Zealand's house prices on average fell by 11%. Everybody ever since then thinks they fell 11% because of the GFC. No. The GFC started with the collapse of Lehman Brothers Investment Bank in the middle of September 2008. Before September 2008, New Zealand house prices had already gone down by 9%. Because we were already in recession. Why were we in recession for the first 3 quarters of 2008? Because the Reserve Bank put us into recession. Why did they put us into recession in 2008? Because they let inflation get away on them, and they had to keep raising interest rates again and again and again. And what I'm just been writing, for instance, in my most recent weekly Tony's View, is if you go back to the start of 2004, when the Reserve Bank started increasing interest rates, they took the rate up by, I think it was quarter of a percent, and they said, well, between the start of 04 and the end of 2006, we think we'll only need to increase interest rates in total 0.5%. In total, they ended up raising interest rates 3.25% by the time we got to the end of 2007. So people need to note that at the start of a tightening cycle, our central bank is all soothing words. Don't worry too much about it. Interest rates won't need to go up all that much. Yes, they will. They will need to go up a fair bit. And so I'm trying to think in my mind, even now and obviously for the next few months, will they need to throw the economy into recession in order to get inflation back under control? Probably no one is seriously thinking about that at the moment. It's not my view, but they have so much to push back against, because as they raise interest rates, what they explicitly want to see, this is what they want. You and I stop buying TVs and cars and holidays, and we stop going out so frequently to the bars, to the restaurants. They want household spending to pull back. Am I going to do that in the near future when I've got extra money sitting in my bank account because of things that happened over the past year, when my house price has gone up by almost 40% from less than 18 months ago? Not necessarily. So I'm not going to rule out that they need to create a recession 2 to 3 years down the track, but I definitely wouldn't print that. It is not my view, but people need to realise that the housing market, it is going to flatten out. And I still think if we're really not seeing serious signs of flattening by the June quarter next year, I think the government will also jump in with something extra, maybe before the Reserve Bank brings the hammer down with some sharp interest rate increases from, let's say, late 2022.
I did just want one final piece, which is on, we've got quite a big team of people in Auckland, and I know that everyone across the country is really feeling for people in Auckland and Waikato at the moment, and it has dragged on longer than expected. I think that's an understatement. What's your take, and I ask you this every time, what's your take on restaurants going under in Auckland, businesses are really hurting. I wouldn't want to be a hairdresser or a florist. What's your take on that and the flow-on effect for the economy? Because it is concerning, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely concerning. Now, every month, apart from last month, other things were going on. I do a survey of my 23,000 subscribers and people who are in business or they work in a particular sector. I say, give me your coalface insights into what's happening in your sector at the moment. And I just released the results of my most recent survey the other day, about 240 responses. And what it shows is, absolute woe in tourism, accommodation, hospitality in particular. But outside of those sectors, there's more demand than the businesses can satisfy. They can't get the consents through quickly enough for the construction sector. They can't get the staff. They can't get the materials. So there is a big backlog of stuff to be done over the next 2 to 3 years in New Zealand. And the lesson of the first lockdown and what we're seeing in New South Wales and Victoria at the moment with themselves opening up with higher vaccination rates than we have here in New Zealand is that people go out and they're looking to spend with a vengeance. They're looking to catch up on things. They've saved up a lot of money in this period of time. So I think when Auckland is free, we will see quite a surge in the spending that we do. I think summer will end up being very strong for a lot of our businesses, and their challenge, especially in hospitality, will, I guess, try to make hay while the sun shines. And I hate to finish on a slightly negative note, but just keep in mind that when the interest rates go up, the explicit intention of the Reserve Bank is that we pull back on spending. So, and that will eventually hit hospitality, etc. But that's a story maybe for late 2022, 2023. But I do see better times ahead. But first of all, we've got to get our vaccination rates up to whatever the target is the government's going to be setting there. And then I think we can all hopefully regain some normal life, hopefully by Christmas.
I will add in there, and it's something NZHL always talk about, but think about what you can control. And I would encourage if to consider, given the high inflation rate, if you are coming out of a lockdown situation and you have saved some money, maybe think about paying that off your mortgage. or making a plan, which is obviously what we specialise in as an organisation. So, and I will close there because a lot of people come to us in financial disarray. They may have really good incomes, and not until they sit down and map it out and make a plan, which is what we do, does kind of a way through, not just a way through, but a really positive pathway emerge. So to close it on a positive note, I would say, please don't be too discouraged by what you're hearing around inflation and interest rates. We cannot control those. What we can control is what we do ourselves. So thanks, Tony. It's really nice to see you, and I know you've been really busy commenting on inflation in the media in the last couple of days. We'll catch you again in a month. And as I always say, Tony's views are his own. He's an independent economist. We like it that way, and they don't necessarily reflect that of NZHL and vice versa. Thanks again. See you later.
Thanks. Bye-bye.